Number 3, financial. So this is the part where I'm not so sure if I'm the expert in it, but I'm going to give a little bit of insight and tips with how it is that it worked for me. So this, again, first of all, the amount of money that you're going to spend for your podcast depends on the why, right? It goes back to the very first tip, which is why it is that you're putting the podcast together. I come from a background in media and broadcast. I grew up in media and broadcast from when I finished high school. So I have a very particular level that I want. I'm very clear on how I want it to be. I don't want it to sound a bit startup-y. It's not what I'm trying to do. So for me, I really, from a financial perspective, I raised enough money to be able to have a team that I had put together, and I also work other jobs and other clients so that can invest back into my podcast, because I wanted to be able to give my podcast the best. Because if I'm working for another media company, for example, I never go half-heartedly. So for my own, why would I do that, you know? And also I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, so maybe that's got a lot to do with it. But the financial aspect, you need to be able to determine at the beginning how much you want to be able to invest in your podcast. Once you have that, if you don't have the money, you need to be able to find ways that you're either going to raise the money. So are you going to go to a sponsor to get a sponsor to come and be a partner with the podcast, or do you want to get an investor? There are quite a few investors that come into the podcasting space these days. Or do you just want to be able to put money into it yourself and then at a later stage get an investor or a sponsor or a partner? For me, I wanted to be able to, because I also am very intentional on the voice that I want to have come through in the podcast, and I want to be in control of it, and I wanted to be able to establish the podcast and be sure in its roots. It's only now, as we're getting into the podcast a little bit later on and looking into season 2, that I will then be able to go to partners so that I can tell the partners, this is what I want, this is how this is the best way that it can work, this is what we're going to do, so that I'm not going into a podcast looking for money and having to twist my vision around to fit the possible investor or sponsor or client, but I'm going in as an equal partner. So for me, from the financial perspective, it's the harder option to go. I'm not going to lie. There are times when I wake up, I'm just like, what are you even doing? Like, are you okay in your mind? But for me, it was just, and it is just important to be able to understand what it is that I want and to settle the podcast, to get it established before I'm able to get a partner on board, so that we can have a partnership that is going to be mutually beneficial.
The Africa Whisperer, Lee Kasumba, telling authentic African stories from a global perspective.